Welcome to the ISM Career Chat podcast, where I will talk with industry professionals about their expertise. Don't forget to hit the follow button to get your dose of career stories and industry tips.
And I took the safety card and I read the safety card, and on top of the safety card was written Airbus A319. And I was like, what on earth is an Airbus? A bus in the sky, right?
Hello dear listeners, this is the ISM Career Chat podcast, where each episode we will talk with industry-specific experts about their industry details and tips and tricks. Today I am your host, Tadas Velička, and our guest today is Martynas Jaugelavičius, the Route Development Manager at Lithuanian Airports. Hello Martynas.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So tell me, you worked at Small Planet Airlines and now you work at Lithuanian Airports.
Mm-hmm.
How did that path go out for you?
So it was a really, interesting story from my perspective, in the sense that aviation came into my life very unexpectedly. I remember having my very first flight in my life, I think it was 2008. And I guess as many people, if you ask them here on the street, what do you know about the aviation industry? I guess the one word that they would say would be Boeing, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember during my very first flight, it was an EasyJet flight between Riga and Berlin. So me being a kid, I sat on an airplane. It was a nice plane in a lot of orange color there. And I took the safety card and I read the safety card. And on top of the safety card was written Airbus A319. I was like, what on earth is an Airbus? A bus in the sky, right? So after returning from that trip, I started Googling, and the rest is history.
So that small safety card is what drew you to the aviation industry from such a young age? I
guess the very word Airbus, a bus in the sky, right? I had no clue what that is. I started, Googling about everything you can, find over the internet, and one thing led to another. At the same time, I discovered photography, so I kind of blended those two things into one. I became a aviation photographer, plane spotter, if you will. And I remember just taking a lot of photographs of airports, of airplanes, and so on and so forth. I dig deeper and deeper into the whole thing. What is aviation, right? And I remember while I started my studies here at ISM in 2015, so after, half a year, there was an open position at Small Planet Airlines to be, for an internship, right? So I applied. I got in, so again, and the rest is history. So I kind of managed to combine those two things, the hobby for aviation, the hobby for photography, into one. I'd also managed to get an internship at the airline, which no longer exists, unfortunately. And one thing led to another, the career progressed, and now I'm here today.
Mm-hmm. So since your internship at Small Planet Airlines, how many times do you fly per year? Just a tiny question, because you said you've flown since you were a kid, so...
No, it depends a lot. 1 year is more flights, the other year is less. It depends how much you travel for personal needs. I checked last year, I broke my whole time record. I flew 50 times, but it involved quite a lot of personal travel and business travel as well. So it depends a lot on what do you do for a living, what kind of necessity do you have to travel abroad. So it depends. It varies from year to year. But I know people who travel every third day, people who travel 100 times per year. So it depends a lot on what you do and where and when you need to be.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So since your first hobby was spotting planes and, plane photography, you also got an internship in there. And what did you exactly do? What do people do in the aviation industry exactly?
Sure. So the internship I was in the marketing/communications department. So we managed the airline's public image, right? Everything from press releases to social media to events, internal, external, and everything in between. So my kind of this, hobby of taking photos was an added benefit for the airline, because I took photos of the planes of the airline, right? I took photos of events and so on and so forth. At the same time, since I was obviously studying here at ISM, I was also a kind of part-time event photographer of ISM, right? Mm-hmm. So there were many photos taken by me at the ISM, social media websites and all the leaflets for students before the admission season started and so on and so forth. So it depends on what kind of department you work for, but I was responsible, as I've mentioned, social media, text writing, copywriting, taking photography and so on. So, one must kind of highlight that, when you're an intern, you're there for a reason of doing the internship, right? Your main focus is the studying part. You're there maybe half of the day, a third of the day. That's not your full-time job. You know, being an intern is not your full-time job. It's, you know, learning new things, you know, experimenting, trying to understand whether or not you fit into that department, into that position, into that industry, right? My main focus was, of course, studying at ISM, so I kind of tried to manage both of them. Luckily, you know, the locations of the university and the office of the airline were kind of close to each other, so logistically that was quite easy to manage. But it was a very interesting, a very challenging period at the same time, but I think I learned a lot from it, and, you know, later on my career progressed into other fields.
So since you said it was challenging for you to match the studies at ISM and also your internship, what would you tell to students who currently now want to get into the aviation industry? What tips would you tell them?
I think the most challenging part for me personally was that I started my internship during the second semester of the first year, right? And combining those two things was a challenge in the sense that you have to combine the workload. There's a lot of things happening at the university. There's a lot of things happening at the office, at the airline, right? You need to combine those things. And for me, it was not the logistics perhaps per se that was most difficult, but the things that you have to kind of separate the files inside your head, right?
Yeah.
When you're at ISM, you're thinking about, well, your job, right?
Yeah.
When you're at the office, you're thinking about studies and the things you have to do. So kind of separating those files in your head was the most challenging thing. For the students that are thinking about internships and jobs and so on and so forth, I would be very, how should I put it? I think people individually must think over this thing very much. What would they gain from that internship? And what are their priorities at the moment, right? The fact that I started during the second semester of the first year does not mean that everyone should do the same, right? If I would do things differently retrospectively, maybe I would start my internship a little bit later, because the first few years are perhaps the most intensive at the university. I think there's most lectures and seminars, most things you need to do to adapt to the new environment, you meet new people and so on and so forth. So for every single individual, I would, in every single case, I would look very deeply into the added value versus the cost in terms of the time and effort you would need to put into those activities. Because if you you need to perform at both places. When you're struggling both logistically and mentally, I guess you maybe not fail, but you'll struggle at both ends. Right? So one must always, I guess, reevaluate what's the added value of being at the university versus at an internship or a part-time job.
So if students want to think about the aviation industry, then they should evaluate, as you said, the cost versus the benefits.
It's not only the aviation industry, it's any internship, any job, because it will take your time, it will take effort, it will take, your mental capacity, and maybe your results at the university will suffer. Maybe they will not. Every single case is different. Every single person is different. So I think you should evaluate that, proposition on a case-by-case basis.
So following up about your job as a route development manager, what do you exactly do? How is your day-to-day life at your job?
I think route development in the aviation industry is part science, part art. Right? What we do is we look at the data available, and this is a very important part because every single industry player sees the same data. There are these big data sites, big data providers, so everyone looks at the same data, but how you interpret that data, what kind of opportunities you interpret, that depends on the person looking at the data and also on the kind of maybe more creative part. Even though on paper it is the job I do is B2B, business to business sales, I like to call it more like aviation diplomacy. What we do is we negotiate with airlines, we negotiate with airports. We're basically selling the idea that an airline should fly to Lithuania instead of any other, for example, country in Europe, right? So it's part art, part science, part diplomacy. We're like the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Lithuanian Airports. We are responsible of attracting new airlines, new routes, and keeping the existing ones in our 3 airports in the country, in Vilnius, Kaunas, and Palanga. So it's a job that demands a lot of listening, a lot of reading, a lot of knowing the industry inside out, looking at the opportunities, accepting the challenges and the constraints that are in the industry right now, and presenting those best opportunities to a given airline for a given route, because every airline is different, every route is different. So it's a very complex process.
So since you mentioned that there's part negotiation, part sales, and you have to think about and evaluate so many things that could affect an airline, what do partnerships have to do with the aviation industry? How much effect do partnerships have?
Right. I think partnerships are very, very important because at the end of the day, we're all people, right? We are people, we deal with people that represent other airports, other airlines. Having that relationship is very important. In any business, not only aviation, I guess, you can look at Excel sheets as much as you want. There's always that psychological element involved. When, for example, hypothetically speaking, two airports would be on the same level on an Excel sheet, there are other perhaps factors that would influence an airline to choose one or the other destination, hypothetically speaking, of course. So partnerships is very, very important because attracting, for example, a new airline or a new route is only part of the business. The second part of the business is maintaining and ensuring or helping to ensure that route, that airline is successful in the country.
Right.
We're always saying to our partner airlines that, we're in this together. Attracting is only the first step. Then you need to, work with publicity, with partnerships, internal, external. For example, we need to work with publicity. People need to know that, for example, a given route or an airline exists in order for them to know and then perhaps to buy tickets. So one thing is attraction. The second part is promotion in a wide sense of the word.
So you mentioned that the first step is attraction and the second one is retention. So that comes to mind, like, what are the most important soft skills that you possess that you think that anyone in the aviation industry should have?
I think in the job I'm doing, and perhaps in many others, I think listening and active listening is one of the most important traits. To understand the needs of your partner is the basis, the foundations of what you do next. So active listening, good communication skills. We come from very, very different backgrounds, different cultures, different countries. So one must do, of course, his or her own homework before going into a negotiation. But listening, active, transparent communication is very, very important. You can try to kind of soften the corners, lie, but at the end of the day, since even though the industry is a large industry, it's quite a small community. So being open and transparent is key, and listening to your partner is the foundation, because you need to understand what is your success. What would success for your partner mean, right?
So listening, negotiation, and communication are the most important soft skills when it comes to the industry that you are at part.
I would highlight you perhaps more in this job, in B2B sales or in B2C sales, especially. This is not specific to an industry. You can be, I don't know, in a furniture company, right? If you do not understand what your client, your partner wants, you might end up with very, very different results, and maybe that not go well at the end of the day.
Okay, so let's get industry specific here.
Sure.
So how has the recent geopolitical and economical influences changed route development for the recent years?
So the two main events in the past 5 years were the pandemic. The global pandemic was the biggest crisis in the aviation industry, period. Never in the history of aviation, so many planes were grounded. There were some periods, as you maybe remember, where practically all countries were closed off. And since there was no demand for flights, supply was very, very limited, and literally country borders were closed, the industry was on the brink of collapse. One thing that saved the industry was, of course, state support, financial support, and not all circumstances, but in many, and also the cargo industry. When all of us sat at home, we found the necessity to buy things online, and those things from online shops have to be delivered somehow, right? So there was a major boost in the cargo side of things in the aviation industry that kind of partially helped it survive the whole pandemic. So the pandemic was a major crisis for the industry. And then a second, I guess, major crisis that happened in 2022 was Russia's war in Ukraine. Not only we as Lithuania, we lost 3 important markets, so Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, but also its ramifications linger up till today. For example, the Russian airspace is closed for European carriers. So some carriers, especially, for example, I could name one example that had a significant impact from Russia's airspace closure is Finland's national carrier, Finnair. Their whole business model before the war was them having the quickest route to Asia, right? So you would fly to their hub to Helsinki, and you would fly over Siberia to Shanghai, Tokyo, maybe Singapore, right? Now, since the whole Russian airspace is closed, you need to fly around it. That means longer flight times, more fuel, more costs.
Yeah.
Could be more expensive flight tickets, but also you lose to the competition because you no longer have that competitive advantage of having the quickest route to Asia. Well, the airline had to adapt. They introduced some more routes to the US, to the Middle East. They had this, of course, very dire necessity to readapt their business model, which has had this, major outside influence to them over the pandemic. But generally speaking, Russia's airspace closure is still a major impact because when you need to fly around it, that adds to the costs I've mentioned before, and it is sometimes also a factor now in our negotiations with some airlines that are located, for example, in Asia, that due to the factor that they need to fly longer, the costs are up. They have postponed perhaps the plans of starting operations to the Baltic states, Lithuania. So it has had a major impact. Of course, we're looking forward to Ukraine's airspace being open, hopefully in the next years, because that has been a major market for Lithuania as well. But we as a country have managed to adapt to the closure of those 3 markets in the east. We have seen that the traffic to the west, to Western Europe, Southern Europe, has not only recovered but also kind of balanced out, compensated for the losses we incurred in the 3 markets I've mentioned in the east. So those 2 were were and still are the biggest challenges in terms of route development. Of course, we have recovered from the pandemic fully. The desire to travel hasn't gone. The desire to travel has been and is still increasing. For example, in 2024, we reached an all-time passenger record at Lithuanian airports. So we're not looking at pre-pandemic 2019 anymore. Now we're looking at 2024 as that record,
as a new baseline,
as a new benchmark.
I see.
So the desire to travel hasn't gone. We're seeing new routes, more frequencies, and I guess after the pandemic, people maybe realize that, they want experiences instead of goods, instead of things. So when there's, we have 2 offerings on the table, a new item or a new experience somewhere abroad, I'm guessing, that, the people choose to experience something new in a foreign country, for example.
Yeah, well, the numbers also correlate to the fact that people want new experiences. So what's one thing you wish you would have known before starting your job at the aviation industry?
I think how complex it is. There's a lot of things that happen before a flight, during a flight, and after a flight. I think if more people realized how complex and difficult the industry is, I think they would appreciate more the thing that has become so common for us, flying. The industry, it's a big industry, but it's a small community. And there's a lot of complex things that happen in the industry for us to have this, what is today the safest mode of transportation. So that would be kind of a short answer. The complexity, and in some cases, how difficult everything is. But difficult not in the kind of scientific perspective, but difficult in complexities perspective.
Interesting. So What are the most common opportunities that students could have when trying to get a job at the aviation industry? What areas?
Right. So the aviation industry, I would kind of slice into three parts. One is the airlines. The second part is the airports. And the third part is the service providers. Technical, ground handling, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of opportunities because it's not only the technical engineering part, because I think we associate the aviation industry as being very technical and engineering focused, which it is.
Yes.
But as any business, as any industry has the kind of operations and engineering part, but also has the administrative part, right? There's a lot of opportunities ranging from, communications, law, IT, and so on and so forth, business management. There's a lot of opportunities, and one should look at specific companies that perhaps interest you, because airlines and airports may have different positions, different roles, different necessities. But the thing I would like to highlight that you do not have to be an engineer, you do not have to be a pilot or a cabin crew member to be able to enter this industry. There's a lot of, as in any industry, as in any business, there's a lot of very different roles. Of course, aviation has that spice of being, the aviation industry. And I think it has a very peculiar thing that once you get into the industry, it's very difficult to get out. It gives you something, it attracts you so much that it's very difficult then to exit. Because it's very, very different, I would say. I'm biased, but I would say it's very different from the rest of the industries. It has that sense, it has that feeling that is very difficult to describe. But once you get into the industry, it's very difficult to then go into a regular business, shall I say.
The fascination of the aviation industry is what keeps people coming back and working at it.
You're sitting in a metal tube, 10 kilometers up in the sky, traveling at 900 kilometers an hour, sipping coffee, and still complaining that the 50-euro ticket was too expensive. It's a miracle. The fact that we can fly, we can reach in a few hours a different country, a different continent, is a miracle. We're one of the first human generations to be able to fly basically on a regular basis. We can fly every single day if you want to, at an affordable price, right? Imagine humanity, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. The average human being throughout his or her lifetime did not exit his own, settlement, village, city. Now we're able, at an affordable cost, to reach another destination, a new continent in a matter of hours. I think it's a miracle. I think it's fascinating. And I think, one must very appreciate the fact that we can fly on this metal tube at an affordable price.
So when talking with this sort of passion, I want to ask you, what's the most enjoyable part of working at the Lithuanian airports?
For me personally, it's the fact that it's more than a business, right? The job that I do, trying to attract new airlines, new routes into the country, it's not only about, a number on an Excel sheet. It's not only about profits. It's something more. It's about, helping to improve the country's connectivity, to give people the opportunity to travel, but also to give the opportunity for investors, business partners to visit the country and invest here. It gives the opportunity, the basis to further grow our economy. So that, for me, helping our country to be more connected with the world is, for me, the most rewarding thing in my job.
I see. So we can call you a patriotic salesman.
It's what I call aviation diplomacy. Fair enough. Finally, you were also once a student at ISM. Sure.
So I want to ask you, the current students now in ISM, what tips would you give them when they start looking at the job market?
Right. My tip would be don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to try out different businesses, different even industries. I have one example. I had an intern at the communications department at Lithuanian Airports, and she thought that communication is her industry, that she wants to work in communications. Doesn't matter, internal, external. And after that internship, she realized that communication is not for her. And now she works in human resources, right? So that internship gave her the understanding that job is not for her. When you're a student, you have more room to maneuver and to experiment. And the more industries, the more jobs you try out, the chances increase that you kind of understand best what fits most for you. And one thing I would also like to highlight is it is not necessarily the well-known, famous, top employers in a given country, in a given industry, that will give you success. You may find your own individual success perhaps in a small company that nobody knows about. Right? The fact that you will land a job or an internship at a superstar company does not mean that you as an individual will be successful. Maybe for your colleagues, for your peers, that position or that company was the best choice, but it may not be for you. I understand people have that fear of missing out, that anxiety that all of my friends are working at perhaps tech startups or very famous companies. That does not necessarily mean that it will bring success for you as an individual. So I highlight all the time, every single case is different, every single person is different, every single time frame is different. What happened for me in 2016 may not be the same what happens this year in 2025. So I always highlight that do experiment as much as you can, as much as you want, in order to find your niche and be the best at it.
So all in all, students should always try to experiment with internships, find their own path to success, and remember that success is individual. And no matter what others tell you, what others do, what you should reflect most about is yourself and find your own happiness. So Martynas, thank you for everything today. I'm happy to have you. We'll see you next time. Thank you very much for staying until the end. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow us for any new uploads.